Imagine having access to a tribe of mentors consisting of some of the best tech leaders in the world, people you may have never heard of, but who in just an hour, you'll know their unfiltered career story, the bets they took, the decisions they made, where they failed, and the lessons that they learned along the way. Welcome to the What Makes You Tick podcast. Hi, I'm Tolu, aka the Podfather. I'm the host of the What Makes You Tick podcast.
And I'm Richard Washington. I'm the founder of Tick Talent. We're the sponsors behind this podcast.
Tick, tick, boom.
Tick, tick, boom, indeed.
Tick, tick, boom. Maybe that's the sign off from now on.
Oh, please go viral.
So this week's episode is Felipe.
Indeed. Oh my goodness gracious me, Felipe. Shall I tell you the story, Tolu, of how I got to know Felipe? So I was working with a candidate as part of a recruitment drive recently, and she said, look, you need to have Felipe in your network. He'd be an amazing person to talk to. So I arranged a call and I was blown away. I'm absolutely convinced that by the end of this, 45-minute recording, people will absolutely fall in love with Felipe in the same way that I did from that first call.
Yeah.
He's so cool.
Yeah, very
and
cool.
I know that's quite generic and bland, so let me give you some specifics. So this guy has worked for companies like Visa, Coca-Cola, then onto really disruptive brands like Amazon and Uber. And he's worked all over the world. How many countries did he say he's worked and lived in, Dolly? Nine countries.
Yeah.
So a true citizen of the world. And his perspective on what great marketing looks like, what building a great brand looks like, how to not just get an extra 1% in your market share, but to absolutely dominate an industry so no one would even look at your competitors, are incredible. And I think there's a huge amount of humility to the way that he's learned what it takes to be a great leader. As a person, what makes him tick is pretty incredible. And I think that people are going to get a huge amount of value from listening to someone who's got so much experience across so much of the world for some of the biggest brands that exist today. And I'm pretty sure that by the end of this, you will find it irresistible to not go and pick up an ice cold Coke.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
So, let's do it. So without further ado, Tolu, let's roll the VT. Hi.
Felipe, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you on. Thanks for joining.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So tell me just a little bit about yourself. Who are you? What do you do?
So I'm a marketer through and through, 30 plus years in consumer goods and tech. I am a father of a daughter who's becoming a doctor. I am the husband of a wife who sells art in Mexico City. And I am a aspiring private pilot.
Interesting. Okay, tell me more about the private pilot.
So for a long time, my father was a military pilot in Spain. My brother flew for Iberia for almost 40 years. I've got a couple of nephews. I think it runs in the family. It runs through my blood. I've always wanted to be a pilot. When I was younger, I had too much astigmatism. I couldn't become one at that time. I had an operation. I can see perfectly now. Wow. And so I'm studying towards my private pilot's license.
I love that. And how far off are you?
So I've got about 40 plus hours. I haven't soloed yet. I'm pretty close to it.
Okay.
So hopefully soon.
That's really exciting. This podcast is called What Makes You Tick. So I would love to know, firstly, what does what makes you tick mean to you when you hear that? And what makes you tick, Felipe?
Professionally, what makes me tick is big assignments, big ideas, big brands. They don't need to be big when I join, but they need to be big by the time I leave. I've always loved marketing. I've always loved sort of the consumer side of marketing. I'm much more of a consumer marketer than a business-to-business marketer. And I just love the brand side. I love how to position a product so that consumers will feel that it's for them.
Okay, that's great. And would you mind talking a bit through your career journey, a bit through what did you study, if you studied at university or anything like that? And how did you get to where you are now?
Sure. So I'm originally from Spain. So I immigrated to the US when I was 10. Didn't know any English, so I had to learn as I went. I did all of my schooling in the US. I went to Georgetown, undergrad, finance and international management. Then I had a small startup with a friend of mine. I'll come back to that because that's done full circle. I'm back together with him on a venture 30 plus years later.
Wow.
And it was too small, so I decided to go and get my MBA. Got my MBA at Dartmouth, at the Tuck School. Fantastic 2 years, best 2 years of my life. And then I started a very international career in marketing. I've lived in 9 countries. I've worked throughout the world. I consider myself a very lucky person for the way that my career has evolved. And throughout that career, it's been across a number of sectors. So I've done consumer goods, I've done financial services. Now I've done 6 years of tech at Uber and Amazon. And really, when I think back in terms of what was my schooling, if you like, it was really Coca-Cola. I spent almost 14 years there.
Wow.
In various positions across the world. That's we say in tech, the TLDR, the summary of what I've done, and I'm sure we'll get into some more detail.
So I would love to understand a little bit about, so you just talked about Coca-Cola. That sounds like quite a chunky part of your career. How did you get there, and how did you progress through there?
So I was in New York City. We had started a venture back in Internet 1.0 days with 2 friends of mine from Tuck.
Okay.
I had been living in London working for Converse. I was their first marketing director for Europe. It was a fantastic job. But these guys started an internet company back in 95. And I said, okay, I need to be part of that. I've always loved tech and wanted to get involved in it. And even though Converse was awesome, I had a chance to really serve that 1.0 wave, and I took it. So we moved to New York and started working on the closest thing I can think of, it was the iTunes of 1996. It was a broadcast model. We were going to broadcast news, sports, music, special events when there wasn't the broadband that you have today. And so we were making deals with universities, which had plenty of bandwidth. And look, we made some bad decisions. We didn't get the funding that we needed, and we lost. And funny enough, our main competitor was Mark Cuban. So you can laugh with me or cry with me, depending on how you look at it. But he had a very similar company. He ended up selling it for a lot of money to Yahoo, as we all know. And the rest is history. So I was in New York, no job, no final paycheck. And a headhunter called me and said, look, Coca-Cola is doing they did rounds around the world back then with senior executives interviewing people. And I got in one of the interview slots. And I was hired to be the brand manager for Coca-Cola Classic in Mexico City. And I'm like, I'm there. Love the brand. I had never really even been to Latin America. And just took the plane and landed in Mexico City. Sometimes when I look back, I can't believe the stuff that I've done and why I've done it. But it was an instinct to get on that plane and come to Mexico City. And probably one of the best jobs I've ever had is being brand manager for Coke in Mexico. Mexico's their still number one market in terms of per capita consumption. And it was just a fantastic experience.
You mentioned a bit about intuition and following your intuition. How big of a part has that played in your career over the years?
Goodness, probably more, if I think of it logically, probably more than it should have. But it's actually been a large force, I would say. And we can go through some examples, but certainly it was intuition and need. I don't want to sugarcoat it. Obviously, I was out of a job and someone's offering me a job to be brand manager of Coke in Mexico. I'm like, okay, even though I had never been to Mexico, I think intuition plus logic there. Yeah. But then I took a bunch of different positions throughout Latin America. And then I came back to Mexico as VP of marketing at some point, like 6-7 years later. And then it was intuition to move to Turkey. That was probably big intuition because I was given one of the 5 CMO type posts that there are at Coke. You have North America, Latin America, Europe. The one that I took was Eurasia, Africa, and then there's Far East. And I said, this is going to be very interesting for my career. I have to go try this now. And of course, I don't regret it at all.
And did you already have a family at that time? So you were uprooting your family to do that? Wow.
I did. And we can talk about that as well, because there's always a personal consequence to everything you do. Because I did end up getting divorced when I was in Turkey. My wife at the time did not enjoy traveling around the world like I did. And look, I don't falter for it. It's what it is. And we have a beautiful daughter because of that relationship. Yeah, it's water under the bridge. But yeah, she didn't have the same sort of intuition and tolerance for travel that I did.
Where do you think that came from? So you guys moved to the States when you were 10 years old. Do you think that played quite a big part in that?
I don't doubt it at all. I think that once you have immigrant blood, once you've experienced uprooting and traveling to a completely different place. If you can imagine Spain, 1975, Franco's still alive when I left.
Right.
And now I'm in the middle of New Jersey, which is where I grew up.
Oh, New Jersey. That's very different to Spain.
Two bigger contrasts than Madrid in the middle of New Jersey. That, those two places are about as far apart as you can be. I think once you do that, you become a citizen of the world, which is what I've become.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, I feel rich because of it. I feel lucky because of it. But like I said before, it's not for everybody.
Definitely. What I'd love to understand is, so it sounded like when you went from director to VP, that seems like quite a big jump. I'm not sure in American terms, but in the UK, that's quite a big jump from director to VP. What enabled you to progress so quickly in such a short period of time?
So I had experience before I came to Coke, right? Even though that experience got honed and improved, and obviously the branding side, which is what I think I learned really well at Coke, was upped considerably when I was in Mexico. But by the time I left Mexico, I was director of brand Coke. So I had responsibility for Coke and Diet Coke at a director level. So then they sent me around to parts of Latin America. So I became the head of Coke for marketing for Central America, Caribbean, Venezuela, Colombia. Quite an interesting place. I used to say you go home at night and everything seems okay. And then you come home, you come to the office the next day and there's been a hurricane somewhere in your region. And you have to deal with that. So it teaches you to be nimble, to be practical, to be commercially minded. I know it's not for everyone, but if you ever get a chance to work in a place like that, which is so diverse in so many different countries. So I learned a lot there. And then they sent me to Argentina a year after a crisis, a big crisis, to lead the South. So Argentina, Chile, Peru, Uruguay, Paraguay. And that's a completely different experience than the one in Central America. Argentina for Coke is a very buttoned down country, very well developed brand. Just Coke is a love brand in Argentina for sure. It wasn't so much in other places. And so I had to take what we learned in Argentina and take it maybe to Paraguay and to Bolivia. So I didn't mention Bolivia was another country that I had at that time. So you learn a different skill set in that place. So by the time I had done both of those, I think management said, okay, I think Felipe can go back and be VP of marketing. So I came back to Mexico and I led all the brands in the second biggest country for Coke. That was a big challenge. And there it's not so much, obviously, it's about marketing and branding, but it's much more about relationships. It's much more about leadership. It's much more about working with the bottling system at Coke, which is a tough set of constituents that you have to report to because they're spending money with you. It's a different skill set again. And so by the time I had done those three assignments, all very different, I was ready to lead a big part of the world, which was Eurasia, Africa. So I lived in Turkey, I lived in Istanbul, and I took care of Africa. That's how I know Nigeria. I took care of Africa, I took care of Middle East, India, and Russia. Done a lot of work in Russia. Russia, a very interesting place because it's obviously not a place where Coke has been developed for as long as in Mexico, for example. So the brand building and the marketing activity is completely different. So that's how I got to Turkey.
Okay. And what made you decide to move from the consumer side of things into the tech space?
Interesting. I come back from assignment as being global CEO of a soda company called Aje. It's a Peruvian company Peruvian company that, to be honest, that for a long time, especially in Mexico, had given Coke and Pepsi, especially Pepsi, a run for their money, selling at a very good price point, and they wanted to create a new Coke. And so they hired me and a really good management team. And it didn't work out. They had some financial issues. And so I left about a year later. And so I came back to Mexico. I had been remarried. I'd remarried a Mexican woman. And so we were in Mexico. I got a call from a headhunter looking for a marketer to come in and help Amazon establish their marketing. They had just launched in Mexico. E-commerce here was nothing at the time. No one knew what it was. And so it was a great opportunity to come in and understand Amazon, which is a beast. And it's very, very different the way that Amazon works than I think any other company I've been involved in. And apply the marketing skills and the marketing toolbox that I had and launch e-commerce in Mexico. And so I said, this is a great opportunity. I wanted to get back into tech. It's really hard for someone who spent 20 plus years in the consumer world to get into tech for the first time. And so I saw it as a great opportunity to do that. And of course, I don't regret it. It was a great experience. And then, of course, 3 years later, I joined Uber, which is what I've been doing.
And what prompted that shift from Amazon to Uber?
So a much bigger role. The Uber opportunity is a Latin America role across both rides and eats. So two very different, somewhat complementary companies, if you like, businesses. And so I saw it as a great opportunity to come back to my roots, which a lot of it is about emerging markets. A lot of it is about establishing brands in places like Latin America.
And you said that was Uber Rides and Eats, that you were responsible for both.
That's all of Uber.
Wow.
In fact, we bought a company called Corner Shop that we integrated while I was here. That has also given us sort of an entry point into grocery shopping, which grocery delivery and shopping.
Wow. What I'd love to know is, along your journey, were there any leaders that you had or mentors that you had that really impacted you?
Yeah, lots of them. A few who made a really big dent. I could probably name one that's quite famous. The CEO of Coke, James Quincy, a British subject, in fact, was my boss twice. Right. When I was in Argentina, and later on for a short period of time in a different environment, he was my boss. And he was great because he really recognized what made me tick. He really recognized that I love sort of my freedom. They call it the freedom within the framework, right? Which is basically, hey, we give this guy some money, we make sure that he's doing the right thing. And the way that he describes it is, I give you a Ferrari, I fill it up with gas, and when I see you getting too close to the edge of the road, I bring you back in and let you keep running. And I think that's the way that I love to operate. I love to operate on big objectives. Hey, we want to do X, and let me put together the plan and the action plan to back that up. So he had a huge impact on me. I think to the point where I have tried to become the same boss to others, because I do believe that's the way you motivate people. Micromanagement is just probably the most soul-crushing thing you could do for someone.
Absolutely.
To someone. Yeah. So I would say that he's one of the people that had a huge impact on me.
And so how would you measure how you're doing with that objective in terms of trying to be that kind of leader?
I think these days, lots of companies have pulse surveys, they call them in some places, where they really it's like a 360-degree survey that they do with people that you work with. And I think that's a good opportunity to really look at yourself in the mirror and say, hey, am I doing the right things for my people? Are they happy? Are they motivated? Do they want to stay? Do they feel like they're putting together their best career opportunities in this company? And you're responsible for that, no? So not entirely, because I think you also have a personal responsibility to your own career. But I think you're the person that helps make some of that happen.
Have you ever received any feedback that you weren't expecting? And how did you bounce back or correct that feedback?
I think we all receive good and bad feedback. No, I've received very good feedback. And it's tough to keep up, right? Because what you don't want to do is, because there are tough decisions to be made in every job, you don't want to be subject to that survey to say, if I do this, I'm going to come back. The survey is going to look bad, right? It's a sort of a very fine balance. Very. And so sometimes people aren't happy, and sometimes you can help that, sometimes you can't. And so you need to, unfortunately, make some tough choices along the way. And I think that you can only judge people a little bit more on the mid and long term. What have they done over 100%. A period of time, as opposed to what did they do this quarter, especially on the marketing side, which is a little bit more long-term focused. No?
Yeah, I agree, because sometimes the company has a direction that they're going in. And as a leader, you don't really have much choice other than tough choices. So you're right. And I think what I was wondering was, in terms of, you're trying to be this leader who gives autonomy, who gives people freedom, but at the same time keeps them within the framework. And it's a really tough balance, like you said. So I was just intrigued as to some of the feedback, and how do you course correct if you're really trying hard to be that kind of leader? Someone might not be receiving it that way, or it might not quite be working.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with setting the right objectives too, right? I think that if the objectives aren't set up correctly, if they're not set up in a way that are setting you up to succeed, then you go from objectives to strategies. The strategies are going to be off, and of course, the tactics are going to be way off. It's a matter of degrees, right? To the extent that you spend enough time to really understand your audience, your customer, you understand the insights that drive that person, you put together then the objectives around that, chances are that you're going to be going in the right direction. Of course, there's always course corrections, etc., but at least you're pointing in the right direction. And that's more than half of the game.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things you mentioned was about liking big objectives. Why do you feel like you like those kind of big challenges?
Especially now in my life, I feel like I've done so many interesting things. I've been involved with so many interesting brands and companies that it's really making the difference, right? It's to go in and really do the same ho-hum, and I have nothing against it, but once you've done it a few times, it's okay. Where can I really make an impact? Where can I really take something to the next level? Where can I really add my fingerprints and my knowledge and my experience to really taking this in a completely different course or to a different level? That's what motivates me, right? Otherwise, it's why all the stuff that I've done, I feel like I'm not putting it to work as usefully as I could.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. It sounds like you're quite a competitive person as well.
Yeah, I think I'm more competitive with myself than I am trying to figure out how to claw back 1% on next month Nielsen, because I don't think it's about that. I always tell my team it's not about the 1%. It's like, how do we run these guys out of business, right? How do we take what we do and how do we make it so great that no one will want to buy the other stuff? It's not about 1 point. It's about complete dominance. So if you want to look at it now, it's competitive, but it's not about pulling back the 1%. That incrementalism is not what drives me. You know,
you're like a fierce competitor. I could tell it a little bit when we started talking.
I'll give it to you.
It's great to see. It's great to see because a lot of the greats are fiercely competitive, whether it's with themselves, with other people. It really drives people to greatness. I saw it a little bit when we started talking, and I love that. You mentioned a little bit earlier about the guy that you started at the beginning with, and then now you're starting to work. Tell me a little bit about that.
This is probably my best friend, someone who I met when my first day in college, and I had started this company with him after college. It was called A Bite of Art. It was an art gallery management system that basically just automated the functions of an art gallery. And at the time, for the first time, you could actually put in a picture as a database field, right? So you can imagine an art gallery has information about their customers, information about their inventory, which of course is very important to them because it's all about, artwork is about provenance. It's where has it been exhibited? What about the work, right? And so now you can put a picture of it in a database and you can actually look through your database on the computer and actually see a photo of the artwork. That didn't exist before. And I know that I'm dating myself, but that's the way it is. So now I'm working with him. I am a shareholder at a wine gallery, at a winery in Napa Valley called Monticello. So a little bit of a pitch for that. MonticelloNapa.com. And it's fantastic wine. And we're trying to really grow this winery to the next level. And his dad had started it back in the 70s. It's one of the oldest family-run wineries in Napa Valley. Still all family-run. The winemaker is one of his brothers. We make fantastic wine. It's not me saying it. It's the critics who put scores on our wines. They also say it. And so I'm working with him on that. 30 some odd years later, we've come back full circle working with each other.
Wow. And is there a tech element to that, or is it purely focused on the wine side of things?
We haven't gotten that far, but of course there's going to be a tech element to the way that we invite people to the winery, the way that we have a wine club. So invite people to the wine club. Of course, we were going to take advantage of all the tools, top of the funnel, bottom of the funnel, CRM, you name it. Obviously, we're going to be putting all the tools we can to work for the winery.
That's awesome. It sounds like through your career, you've built some very good, sizable, high-performing teams. What are some of the things that you look for in the people that you bring onto your teams?
I think it's someone, first and foremost, willing to work with others, but also not having too much ego to not allow other people to give you ideas and to tell you how they would do things. I think I want people with a strong ego, of course, because I think it's about the ego that makes you succeed. And that's the driver of what motivates you, fair. But you also have to be able to modulate that ego and be able and willing to take other people's advice. I think that's the number one thing that I look for. Obviously, the hygiene stuff. Hey, are they a good marketer? Have they done interesting things? Check. But to me, it's about being willing and able to take other people's points of view and make them your own. That's the way that I've worked. And I've done one of the things that's characterized my work in many of the companies where I've worked, especially the ones that are regional or the assignments that I've had that are regional, is I'm a huge believer that we're all, as human beings, much more alike than different. And so I've always pushed, and I've been successful in convincing everyone that if you really go up to a human level, instead of a sort of very tactical level. So, for example, I don't know, in Brazil, we do things this way. And in Mexico, we do things this way. Yeah. It's like, okay, check. But you're taking me to a very low level, tactical level. Let's talk about what motivates people to do X or Y. Yeah. Let's talk about the human element of that. Let's talk about what makes them tick as humans. And if you take your strategies to that level, you can put together regional strategies instead of local strategies. And that makes them a lot stronger. That makes them a lot richer. That makes them be able to travel across borders. That's really what sort of the hallmark of a lot of the work that I've done.
Because it's really interesting, this debate of localization versus globalization, and to what level do you personalize to the different locations. So I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it.
Now, of course, there are always going to be nuances. There are always going to be ways in which you take things to market that resonate with a particular consumer in a particular country. Check. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that the strategy can't be the same, right? In other words, as a very blunt example, a Coke refreshment is really what brings you into the franchise. It's really what gets you drinking Coke, because it's such a unique and amazing experience to have a cold Coke. Okay? Yes. Yeah. That works in Russia. That works in Mexico. That works in the US. That works anywhere you take it. The way you land that strategy, the way that maybe you talk to the consumer could be a little bit different. Yes. I would argue that it doesn't need to be, but it can be. And therefore, it's a way in which you can talk to a consumer in a very local way, but with a very much global or regional strategy. That to me is the difference.
Love that. Love that. One thing I'm interested in your career journey is, how do you think you're different now to the leader that you were when you first started?
I think I've become a lot more, I think I've learned to thank people more. I think initially in my career, I was running fast. Hey, if you're not on this bus, you're off this bus. I think I've become a little bit more of a humble leader. I think I've come to realize that I'm nothing without the team, that I'm nothing without the work of the team. Those are lessons that sometimes you learn the hard way. Sometimes someone has to whack you on the head and say, hey, listen, if it wasn't for these guys, you wouldn't be where you are. And of course, you learn that. And so I've become a lot more thankful. I've become a lot more aware of the effort that people put in to get stuff done. And of course, I'm less involved in that day to day. It's much more about leading the people so they become leaders, right? And so all of a sudden you have to take a different viewpoint to things that are going on. And that kind of gives you a sense of how insignificant you are and how absolutely significant they are. And I think that's the hallmark of a true leader, is when they become so insignificant that it's all about the team, then I think you've done your job.
Yeah. I think it's such a weird dynamic, because you have to be so insignificant, even though to your team, for example, you're very significant, because you set the tone, you set the direction, you set the velocity that everything's going at. So it's that weird balance of knowing that without your team, you're nothing, but you still have to motivate your team, lead your team, and be very significant to them.
Yes. And you have to do it in a way that they almost feel like it comes from them, And that's a very sort of fine line. And you also, by the way, what's really tricky about it is, as you're becoming insignificant for that team in the way that I've described it, you also have to be very present and significant to those around you in other functions. You have to be seen as the leader. You have to be seen as the person that's making that happen, all while letting your team and your team leaders, making sure that they own the stuff that they're doing. Yeah. That's the hardest part.
Yeah, it's a real skill in balancing these things.
Yeah.
Just as we close, you've mentioned a few different things of changed, been different over the years. If you could talk to Felipe from 30 years ago at the start of your career, what would you say to him?
You're going to have a lot of stamps in your passport. Get ready to travel. No, I think that I'm not sure I would change anything in my career as I look back. You know, maybe there are a few positions that I wouldn't have taken, maybe one, but I am really fulfilled, happy, satisfied. You know, use the word that you want, the synonym that you want for those three, with the career that I've had. And I'm not done. I still have a few bullets left in the cartridge to do some big things and really take now a long time in CPG, dog years in tech, because each year is really is a dog year, and really combine those two skill sets and those two experiences for something big. And that's what I'm going to go after.
That's amazing. And I personally love seeing your passion, your energy, your competitive fire. So thank you so much for your time and your thoughts. It's been a really good chat. And thank you guys for listening. And we'll catch you on the next episode.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you guys so much for listening to the episode. We really appreciate the time that you've taken to spend some time with us to hear about the journeys of sales leaders and learn how you can become a better leader at what you do.
Absolutely. There's a huge amount of value in listening to someone else's story. And what we're really aiming to do with every one of these episodes is introduce you to someone that you might never have met, but that's got some great lessons as part of their own journey that you can take inspiration from. And whether that's things that you've liked that you want to try and replicate, big decisions that they've taken that give you a bit of courage to go and take that leap yourself, or maybe some things that they've learned the hard way that you can avoid to basically find your own path a bit faster with some of the less messy stuff in between. So we really appreciate your time. We do this every week with a different leader within technology. So please go back and have a look through some of the other conversations that we've had to find other people that might inspire you, that you can bring into your own network as virtual mentors. And also every week we release this. So if you want to be the first person to listen and meet your new mentor, hit the subscribe button and then you'll get a notification every time that podcast gets released. So thank you so much for your time. We'll see you on the next pod.